Welcome back to the channel. We're playing 20 questions with.
David Harcombe. I am a software engineer and I've been a fountain pen user all my life.
All right, let's get into the questions. When I say fountain pen, what pen do you think of?
I immediately reach for my Parker 75, my Cecil, which was a silver wedding anniversary gift from my wife.
All right,
That's my daily driver.
okay. How did you get into pens?
I've always used fountain pens. My school that I went to, my primary school, when I was, which obviously you can tell I'm not originally from Canada. So my primary school is age 8, 9, 10-ish, 8, like 7 or 8 years old. And you had to pass a handwriting test to be allowed to not use a pencil. And once you passed your handwriting test, fountain pens were mandated. You were not allowed to use a ballpoint. You must use a fountain pen. So the very first fountain pen I ever owned was a gift from my parents for passing my handwriting test, and it was a Parker 25.
Well, you've answered question number 2. What was your first pen?
Oh, there you go. Sorry
And you
about that.
question number 4 about your daily driver. So number 5.
Well, we can supplement the question number 4.
Okay.
I have more than one.
What are your other daily drivers?
Currently, my other daily driver is this one, which is a Conway Stewart from about 1936. The reason I have 2 daily drivers is that's the one that I use on notebooks which are slightly wider. Because that one's a medium and my 75 is a fine.
Okay. I like that you change your nib size depending on the width of your notebook.
That's right. It depends on the width of the lines and the dots. I tend to use a dot notepad, and that's mostly better if I'm taking technical notes with a fine.
Okay.
But if I'm writing for pleasure, I'll usually use a medium.
All right. What's your favorite ink?
Oh, my favorite ink. That is a hard question because it changes according to what I've bought most recently. But I think probably the one that I go back to most often is probably that one.
Ooh.
The Pilot Iroshizuki. It's Murasaki Shikibu, the purple. A sort of dark bluish purple. And that's probably the one I go back to most regularly. And as you can see from that bottle, I need to buy another one.
I know.
So I would say that's my favorite.
Yeah, I know somebody that owns 3 bottles of it.
Wow. I have 3 Pilots up there, but one's a red and one's the blue.
What's your favorite brand of either pens or ink?
Well, my favorite brand of ink is probably Pilot, although I do really have a liking for there's a brand that makes inks based on old Japanese kimono dyes. So their inks are all based around historical kimono dyes, and are made using, where they can, the same ingredients. I forget the name of that brand. I could dig in my ink box and find it. And the other ink would be Pilot because that's my daily ink. As to pens, Parker. I'm a long-time Parker fan. Not just because I had a 25 as my very first pen, but I usually write with my 75 or one of my many 51s, or I have a whole bunch of Parkers.
Yes, you had some very cool Parkers at the Pelican Hub.
I did indeed.
Vintage or modern?
For me, probably vintage.
Okay.
By choice. I have some moderns, and it's not that I dislike them. I do have some very nice modern ones. I've got a stainless steel cross, again, a gift from my wife. But I have a few modern Pilots, and a couple of other modern ones, like a Safari and a couple of Mujis. But modern ones, I tend to buy more inexpensive modern ones, and I buy them for a specific purpose. Like, I buy the inexpensive Muji pen, which is like $20 or something like that. It's not a bad pen. The nibs may be a little stiff, so it's a little scratchy, but I use it on the subway because I'd be upset if I dropped it on the streetcar or dropped it down the subway and it rolled into the tracks, but I wouldn't cry. And I would shrug my shoulders and go, oh, well, that's a pain. And I'll go and get another one. Whereas if I dropped a vintage Parker and it fell onto the tracks, I would be distraught. I would be absolutely inconsolable. So I have pens for specific needs, but for myself, for my day to day, I tend to use vintage.
Do you swatch all your inks?
I don't. I should. I see other people swatch them, and I think that's such a really good idea. And yet, when it comes to doing it, I tend to forget. What I do is I have just a little card with every pen that's currently inked
Okay.
written in the ink with the pen. So I have an example of how it writes, how fine fat its nib is, and the color of the ink that's currently in it. And I cross that out and replace it if I change the ink in a pen, etc., etc. That's probably the closest I get to swatching the inks. Mind you, despite what it looks like there, I don't actually have that many inks. I don't have like hundreds of inks. I'm looking behind you, and I've got less than half of that, I would guess.
Well,
And I'm assuming that they're not all of your inks. If they're swatches that are hanging behind you, then that's not all your ink. No,
uh,
I probably have about 15 or
most
20 inks.
this is all ink samples.
I remember you coming with like bags of ink samples. Yeah, I don't have anything like that. I have very few inks. So,
They're if you put them if they're just out, they get everywhere. But if you
yes,
vintage pretty containers, then they can just be hidden away, and then it's a real pain when you go looking for a
when you,
specific color.
yeah, that's right.
Jump out on the floor, hope all lids are on correctly.
Yes, that happened on the way back from the Pelican Hub. I found that one of my ink sample lids was not on correctly. So the inside of my bag is now the lining of my bag is now an interesting color.
Oh, lovely. Yes. No. Yeah. But I keep any swatches for colors I've gotten rid of. So even if I've gotten
Right.
rid of a color, I keep the swatch because I want to know what that color looked like. Because sometimes I look at something online and I go, "Oh, that's really pretty," but I've actually had it and I didn't like it in person.
Exactly. That's a really great reason for doing it.
Yeah.
Because I would probably benefit from that because I don't have that many inks, as I say. So if I run out of one, I'm getting to the bottom of a bottle. I'm like, did I really like that, or have I just used it up? And I don't have that discipline of being able to say, yeah, it was okay, but I wouldn't buy it again. And the swatches would be useful to be able to write next to them, really buy this again or don't touch.
Yeah. I would say about 70% of those are actually just sample vial swatches.
Mhm.
And it's like at least half of them are colors that I've got. On the back, they say would not buy a bottle of
Yeah, yeah.
the
The other thing I'd find it useful for, I think, is that I've got quite a restricted line of inks, and part of the reason for that is because I use vintage for the
Mhm.
most part. I'm generally careful, and if I know that my pilot inks, for example, go well in the vintage pens and they don't leak and they don't go gummy or something like that. I mean, I had one. I love the color. It's goblin green, I think. I
Okay.
love the color. It's a slight sheen to it. But in that Conway Stewart, I undid the lid and it had turned to glue. It had turned all gummy, and I had to flush it completely. And I ended up just putting the pilot back in it, and that's absolutely fine. But
Yeah.
that's the hazards of using a pen that's nearly 100 years old.
So the only thing I put in my vintage pens are Mont Blanc ink,
Yeah, exactly. You find one that works and just stick with it.
which is why I owned, and it's why I own so many colors of it because so much of my collection is vintage that it just
Exactly. And I'm in the same boat, I think. I found a few inks that work well with vintage pens, and I tend to just stick with them.
yeah,
Fortunately, they've all got good colors, so I'm
yeah.
good. I'm not sticking with Quink.
I have a single bottle of Quink.
I used to use that all the time. It was cartridge. In the Parker 25, it was the Quink cartridges, and they had the little, you could flick the top and it would break the seal, and you get an extra couple of you get an extra half a day's writing out of it if you've forgotten to change the cartridge that morning. I remember those well, but I haven't used that sort of royal blue ink for years.
Yeah, so I've got a bottle of Pink Blue Black.
That's the one that I always used to use. I used to have the cartridges in the quaint blue black.
I quite like it. I don't like their blue. I don't like
Mm,
their black, but I like their blue black.
yeah, yeah. I'm not a big blue fan or a big black fan. I like medium colors, like a turquoise or a purple or something like that.
That's fair.
Hmm.
Any pens always get the same ink, or do you switch it up?
Um, yes, I would say that my Sicily probably always gets the same ink. It probably always gets the Pilot Murasaki because it's consistent. I know it's a good ink. I know it doesn't blot. I know it doesn't go gummy. And if I'm using that pen, I'm a bit of a rarity in my office in that we'll go into meetings and I don't carry a laptop. I have my phone with me, but I don't take a laptop. I only take a pen and paper. So I have to know that I'm going to pop the lid on that pen
Yeah.
and it's not going to have leaked. It's not going to be gummy. It's just going to write. And so I stick with that ink because it's my daily office work pen and because it's a beautiful pen. But for that reason, I stick with that ink. I find that if I take a laptop into a meeting, I'm just constantly distracted. It goes ping, you look at chat messages, you look at emails that come in. There's nothing worse than having an interview with somebody or chatting with somebody who's got a smartwatch, and every 30 seconds they're doing this and checking what the wrist is buzzing. There's nothing worse than that in a meeting. So I tend to just use a pen.
I silence mine.
There's nothing wrong with the smartwatches. I have one. I have one and they're great for their purpose, but in a meeting, they're worse than a laptop because you lose people's attention all the time.
Mine automatically gets silenced if I'm in a call with somebody, if I'm heading into
Absolutely.
somebody, the first thing I like as it gets silenced.
Yeah, I do the same with my phone. It silences itself and my laptop silences itself. And I use vintage watches as well. So
Do you keep your writing sample cards so that you know how every pen writes with the ink in it, or do you just like use them and then get rid of them?
no, I have a little notepad, a little Rhodia, little
Okay.
tiny sort of ring binder notepad back here. And
Yeah.
every time I buy a new pen, I'll ink it or at least dip it and ink it and write with it and keep a note in that pad of generally speaking what it is, what model it is, what make it is, where I got it,
Okay.
a handwriting sample, price if I paid for it, um, cost to repair, time to repair if I had to repair it, um, all that kind of thing. And I'll keep that notebook. And so I have a sample of every pen that I've got. I don't know that it's deliberate. I think it fell out that way because I wanted a catalog of all the pens I'd got, where I got them from. But it's a good, now you've mentioned it, it is a good reminder of how every single one writes.
What's a pen you wish you could see in person?
I think I'm sadly going to answer two questions in one again with that and say that the pen that I really want to see is probably what I would consider my grail.
All right.
And that is the Pilot Mu, the single titanium body. Because I'm a sucker for an 80s style um, silver, chrome, titanium, shiny pen or shiny things. I'm a sucker for that sort of thing. I mean, that's the cross that my wife got me years ago, and it's just this plain silver, entirely silver. Yeah, I'm a sucker for that. So I also think it looks amazingly elegant.
Oh,
That unibody, massive nib, all part of a single turned piece of titanium.
that's
Yeah,
not a pen I was into until I started to do this series, but it has come up in so many episodes, and so I've gotten to look at it so many times. Now I'm like, oh,
they're kind of rare. I mean, they're coming in at like they're not a super expensive Grail. I mean,
least one of those things that I want to see in person. I want to see it.
exactly.
I want to hold one. That'll
Yeah.
probably be enough. But I've now linked it so many times for this series. I just,
Yeah, I think that's probably what I would class. I mean, you could go really expensive. We when COVID hit and everyone was being given a stipend to kit out their home office,
Hmm.
we actually had specifically written in the terms and conditions from our company, you may not spend this on a fountain pen. So either somebody really knew me, because I would have gone to Leywans and I would have bought the $1,800 sterling silver Yoda lead fountain pen. So either somebody knew me or somebody had tried it on before, but we were specifically prohibited from buying fountain pens, which
That
seems strange to me, but there you
that
go.
surprises me. Um, but also I applaud the ambition to spend the money to kit out your home office on a fountain pen. Uh,
Absolutely. I mean, heck, I've got a laptop. What more do I need? I don't need anything else.
what pen would you recommend to a beginner?
Actually, I've been asked this several times by people who are beginners and who wanted to get into fountain pens. And this may be a slightly controversial choice because people have strong opinions about this brand,
Mm,
but Lamy Safari
okay.
for an absolute beginner. And the reason I say it for an absolute beginner is because the Lamy Safari has that funny triangular shaped nib grip. And if you've never used a fountain pen before, that nib grip forces you to hold a fountain pen correctly. And I like them personally. I've never had a bad experience with a Lamy. I've always found them good. I know I read reviews, and it seems to be almost a coin flip as to whether you get a good nib or a bad nib on a Lamy. Personally, I've always had a good nib, so I've been lucky with that. But they're easily replaceable if it is a bad nib. Um, and I think that for a novice, the Safari isn't expensive. They look nice. They write well. And they help you learn how to hold a pen so that you know what the angle of a nib is, so that you're not going to scratch and get blots firing everywhere, and a little bit of spray if you hold it upside down and things like that. So that would be my recommendation. And in fact, our barista at work was trying to be, he was quitting to become an author. And we clubbed together and bought him a fountain pen and some ink. A few of us got together and bought him a Lamy Safari and some ink because he wanted to learn. He wanted to write it longhand. So we were like, okay, here you go.
Very good. The nib on my Lamy was great. I just I can't get my head around the grip. I just
I think it's a love it or hate it, and also a lot will depend on hand sizes. For example, I
mhm.
mean, I love this one. It's another vintage one. It's a Parker with one of those really weird, the flight with
Yeah.
one of those really strange nibs.
I have
It's
been
lovely, but
doing
it's
that.
so thin.
I love that pen.
It's a lovely pen, but it's so thin for me that I can't hold it for a long time comfortably
Yeah.
because I've got such big hands that some of the vintage pens like the ST Juniors and things, I can't use them because they they're too small. Even posting them, they're uncomfortable to use because they're just too small for my hands. So maybe it's that. Maybe it's the fact that the Lamy is just the right size for me.
What ink would you recommend to a beginner?
um, Again, probably a Pilot. And I love the Pilot. It's the Arosh. Which one is it? It's the Arosh Izuku. It's a slightly turquoisey blue. It's blue enough for you to get away with it for general use if you're not sure about using a funky ink. But it's not boringly navy blue or black.
What advice do you have for somebody wanting to try out fountain pens who might be a bit intimidated by them?
um, the first thing is don't be intimidated by them. They're just a writing instrument. They're just a tool. If you write normally, if you write as a rule, you can write with a fountain pen. Um, I would also say chat with somebody who uses them, find somebody who knows them, and talk to them. And maybe they'll let you try some of their pens. I'm a little precious about some of my pens, particularly vintage ones, because as you know, you write with one and it learns your handwriting and your grip and your where you position the nib, and it can be annoying if you lend it to someone else and you can watch them. I was in a meeting one time and one of the clients reached across to borrow my pen and he heard my indrawn breath and he was like, "Is that special?" I said, "Well, it's a 1967 Parker." He's like, "Yeah, anyone got a ballpoint?" So there is that. But I mean, if you go to a pen store, and I do mean a pen store, not um, Indigo or something like that that happens to sell pens, but you go to a pen store, they'll generally have testers that you can try. And that will help you, that will help them a lot. And I would say that absolutely go speak to somebody, whether it be the guy in the pen store. Um, um, I would call out lay wines. They've always been really good to me and not pushy in
Hmm.
terms of not in no way pushy trying to get you to buy a pen. They quite happily dig pens out from the case and let you have a tester on your Vanishing Point or your whatever, your Viscontis.
Last
And Andrew's the same under the in the House of Fine Writing under the Sheraton.
never been in, always want to, but I love last time I was in to Lywins, got to try Yarder lead, which has been on my
Exactly.
Grail list
Exactly.
forever.
And they know that you're not going to buy it, or at least not right now. You might if you win the lottery, but not right now. But they're always happy to let you play with them and let you try them.
Yeah,
And that's gold. Go in with somebody who'll keep you straight and have a try.
yeah,
And if it's your first fountain pen, don't spend $1,500 on
yeah.
it. Go find a Twisby or a Sailor or something like that, or an inexpensive Lamy.
I like that you put Sailor in that list.
I have friends who swear by Sailor. I don't actually have one. I've never actually gotten around to buying one yet, but I have friends who swear by them. So,
I like mine, but I have
mm.
very specific nibs on mine.
Yes, I saw you talking about the specific nibs with someone else in the previous one, and it's like, wow, yeah, I've never gotten into the nibs to that extent yet.
I'll tell once we're done, I'll tell you what's on my Sailor currently. What filling mechanism do you think is most interesting, regardless of if you actually like to use it or not?
Got to go with the Parker 61, the capillary fill. That was the single coolest filling mechanism I think I'd ever seen. And I do have one, as you know, you've seen it.
I've seen.
Um, and I love the fact that you can literally just drop it back end first in a bottle and leave it for a couple of minutes and it will fill itself. And then as you pull it out, because it's made of Teflon, all the ink just runs down and then gets sucked back up into it. So it's practically self-cleaning as well. They were wonderful. It's a shame that they stopped making it. I don't think it was 100% reliable. It is an absolute pig to clean, let me tell you. It's an absolute monster to try and clean. It involves a turkey baster and warm water, and let's not go there. It's awful. But it's a lovely pen. It's an absolutely lovely, lovely pen and a great idea.
So we're in the car today, and I tell mom that I'm interviewing you, and she goes, "Oh, he's the one with the cool Parker that had the capillary system." And I go, "Yeah." And she went, "Oh, you really liked that. That's
Yeah,
real someday, isn't it?" And I went, "Yeah, someday." Her next comment was, "So how do you clean one of those?" And I would decide on a single color of ink that always went in the pen and it would never be cleaned.
it would never be dry and it would never be cleaned. Yeah,
You always get
it's
the same color.
it's the honest answer is it's a turkey baster so that you can flush it through.
Okay.
That's generally seen to be the best way of doing it.
Well,
There you go.
fabulous. I learn something every time I do this show.
But yeah, they were such a lovely fill. And the problem is now they're hard to get hold of because so many of them were taken apart and a cartridge converter done or a converter done to them.
And
Um,
that's what I see everywhere is
yeah,
former capillary pen converted to, and I'm like, but what I
but I
want
want the capillary. Yeah, I want the original. Yeah,
the
I managed to find
thing is
one.
absolute pain.
Yeah, I managed to find one, and it's a lovely, lovely pen. It's a hooded nib, and I do like a hooded nib.
Yeah.
In point of fact, I find that I had to travel last year for work, a couple of flights, And taking a fountain pen on flight is always iffy. I found a 51 is practically leak proof on a flight.
Interesting.
Like I took one filled to Berlin and I got out at the other end and I could uncap it and write with it immediately. There was no blotting, no leakage, and they were made. They were branded as being practically leak proof, practically blot proof. Coming back, it didn't fare as well, but I think I had it like upside down or shaking in the luggage rack or something. But yeah, generally speaking, I really like those, the hooded nibs, and the 61 is also a hooded nib.
I've always had fairly good luck flying with pens nib side up. Like as
Yeah,
long as I remember to have them nib side up, there have only been a couple pens that have totally leaked.
on the way out, I was using it, so I had it in my pen case sort of next to me, standing upright. On the way back, I wasn't bothering working, so I just like left it in my laptop bag, so Lord knows which way up it was.
What nib size do you prefer to write with?
Two, either a medium or a fine, depending on what I'm doing.
Right. Is there a style of nib you love or find interesting but would never actually use?
I love a calligraphy nib, an italic calligraphy pen, and I do play with calligraphy. Um, but I would never use one day to day. It's totally impractical for taking day to day notes. I think I'd probably find the same with a broad nib, that it would be too fat for me to use most of the day. I would love to try a flex. I've never tried a flex nib. I would love to try a flex, but I haven't got round to it
I can I can probably fix that.
yet.
I have many. Um, do you always use the same paper? If so, what paper? If not, what paper's your favorite?
Do I always use it? Generally speaking, yes. I used to use Rhodia all the time, but now I use Clairefontaine because I prefer the notebooks. I find that they're generally nicer to write in. So I have a whole bunch of Clairefontaine notebooks, just the My Essentials ones, the 90 GSM, I think it is.
Other than blue and black ink, do you have a least favorite ink color?
Least favorite?
Favorite ink?
Prob Yeah, probably yellows or oranges. Um, just because they're so twitchy in terms of how they write. It's like how readable they are when you finished with it.
Yeah.
I also find the pigments in them tend to fade quicker. So I won't normally use something that light. Having said that, I do have a really nice one. I've got the Cream of Earl Grey from Ferris Wheel, and that's a very faint ink. If you use that with a hard nib, you're not going to get anything out of it. You have to use it with quite a soft or a fat nib, but it's a nice color. But I wouldn't really ever pick yellows or oranges. Maybe a deep orange, but never a yellow.
Well, thanks for playing 20 questions.
Thank you very much.